when I said this at the end of part 3 of the Argument Against Ahsoka series. The point of this list was to be very thorough. In fact, I may have missed some instances. Turns out that sentiment was correct. My sister and I actually missed quite a few points when scripting those first 3 videos, so this part is an attempt to cover the most glaring points we've noticed since recording the original series. So without further ado, let's get into it. Season 1, Episode 3, Shadow of Malevolence. During their run on Malevolence, Anakin orders Ahsoka to gun down the enemy fighters on their tail. And Ahsoka snaps back with,
"Your fancy flying is making it difficult!"
when she should know that without Anakin's said fancy flying, they would have already been dead at this point. After insisting that they need a plan change, Ahsoka fails to offer any ideas as to what they might do instead. This proves completely unhelpful, as it is simply offering criticism rather than giving a potential solution. We see this many times throughout the show, where Ahsoka casts doubt on others' plans, yet often fails to come up with any tenable alternative, and usually just piggybacks off of someone else's idea, or else comes up with the dumbest or most obvious solutions. But moving on, in the final moments of the episode, when Anakin and Plo Koon are congratulating each other on their leadership skills, Ahsoka interjects with,
"Excuse me? I believe it was my suggestion to change the plan?"
despite the fact that this was in no way related to the conversation, since Ahsoka's ultimately unhelpful criticism of Anakin was not an example of leadership. Obviously, Ahsoka felt her ego needed some stroking, and thus was born one of the most nonsensical segues ever. Wow. What a glory hound. Season 1, Episode 6, Downfall of a Droid. When Obi-Wan advises retreat and Anakin stubbornly insists otherwise, Ahsoka piggybacks off Obi-Wan's scolding, using it to talk down to her master.
"We don't stand a chance against
Ahsoka.
Suicide is not the Jedi way, Master."
This is ironic coming from the girl who later orders her tiny squadron to attack 5 separatist battleships, despite the warnings from her superiors. Ahsoka, your hypocrisy knows no bounds. Obi-Wan then justifies Ahsoka's show of disrespect toward Anakin by telling him to listen to his Padawan. This is completely out of character for Obi-Wan and makes him look completely moronic, because in no universe is the teacher meant to be subject to the student, and Obi-Wan, as Anakin's master, should know that better than anyone, something that Anakin then goes on to remind him of.
"You should listen to your Padawan."
As you listen to yours, my old master?
After the loss of R2, Anakin is reacting poorly to Obi-Wan's assurances that he'll find a suitable replacement, prompting Ahsoka to give him weird looks, despite the fact that she was displaying sensitivity just in the previous scene. Obviously, she doesn't understand how grief works. Sorry, Ahsoka, but these things tend to last more than a few seconds. This blatant insensitivity continues throughout the episode, with Ahsoka introducing R3 as a superior alternative to R2.
"I've heard that the new R3s are far faster in thinking skills and more powerful than the old R2 units."
Despite the fact that she knows R3 is meant to only be a temporary replacement. And when Anakin doesn't react well to her unkind words, instead of apologizing and comforting him, she chooses instead to comfort the droid.
"Don't worry, Goldie. You'll get to know him later."
Ahsoka calls Anakin Gramps. Season 1, Episode 9, Cloak of Darkness. Ahsoka starts off the episode by remarking how bored she is.
"Finally. It's been such a boring trip."
Once again displaying her un-Jedi-like lust for action. Strangely enough, Luminara doesn't call her out on this. When Luminara is interrogating Gunray, Ahsoka openly displays her impatience, crossing her arms, tapping her fingers, and glaring disrespectfully at Luminara, when she could be using this moment to learn from a Jedi Master. After Ahsoka's atrocious display of violence, the writers reward her for her horrendous behavior by having Gunray agree to talk, rather than having him clam up like he realistically would.
"Perhaps I was too hasty. Let us negotiate.
This makes Luminara and the Jedi as a whole appear inferior to Ahsoka. After Gunray remarks that the Separatists are there to save him, Ahsoka responds with,
Maybe they're here to make sure you won't talk.
displaying an almost gleeful attitude at the idea of Gunray's death. Ventress, instead of killing Ahsoka, which would have been much more in character for her, instead locks her in a cell, where Ahsoka, consumed by rage, blindly attacks the ray shield. Wow, such a Jedi-like attitude we're getting from Ahsoka today. After Luminara instructs Ahsoka to stay behind while she goes to face Ventress, Ahsoka incessantly complains to Argaius, showing disrespect to Luminara and allowing herself to be manipulated by the enemy. Ahsoka never acknowledges this fact later on, and the writers use Gunray's comment about how he'd never risk his own skin to justify Ahsoka disobeying a direct order and enabling Gunray's escape. And then they cover by having Luminara act as though it were her fault.
I've been a fool.
Despite having a bomb go off right under her feet, Ahsoka doesn't garner any lasting injuries from the experience. In fact, she doesn't get so much as a scratch on her, showing just how ridiculous her level of plot armor is. Season 1, Episode 13, Jedi Crash. When Aayla Secura tells Ahsoka don't lose 1,000 lives just to save one, Ahsoka responds with,
Maybe.
What? Honestly though, remember this scene because we're going to see later in Season 7 that she still didn't learn this lesson. After explaining that he doesn't want weapons in their village, the Lerman Elder insists that Bly leave with Ahsoka. Ahsoka nonsensically decides to take this as an insult, insisting that she doesn't need help. Furthermore, she glares at Sakura as if it's her fault.
I can handle it. I don't need help.
Really? After snapping at the Lerman Elder for saying the Jedi aren't peacekeepers, Ahsoka displays her preference for violence in her encounter with the Mastiff Falone, going for her lightsaber first before reluctantly agreeing to Weg 2's non-violent methods of subduing the creature.
No! Don't! Fine.
At the end of the episode, Ahsoka credits herself for saving Anakin by claiming that they wouldn't have found the village in time if she'd stayed behind like she originally intended. This is ignoring the fact that it was actually thanks to Ayla's deductive skills that they were able to find the village, and that her intended lesson for Ahsoka was about teamwork.
In order to get help quickly, we must work together.
It's yet another weak attempt to make it look like Ahsoka learned something, when in reality she's just feeding her own massive ego again. Season 1, Episode 14, Defenders of Peace. Ayla says they need to hide before the Separatists discover them, but as soon as Tewat Ka agrees, Ahsoka chimes in, insisting that the Lerman need their help. As expected, the writers don't have Ayla call her out for this. After Anakin instructs Ahsoka to respect the Lerman's neutrality,
If the Lerman want to remain neutral, we won't force them into war.
Ahsoka sulks, watching with crossed arms as the Lerman Elder makes his exit. This disrespectful attitude continues throughout the episode, with Ahsoka shortly thereafter accusing the Lerman of being cowards.
I call it no courage.
Fortunately, Ayla is quick to refute this sentiment, by pointing out that it takes courage to stick to one's beliefs, something which Ahsoka, as a Jedi, should be well aware of. Nevertheless, Ahsoka stubbornly clings to her obvious dislike of the Lerman, angrily reminding Anakin that Tewat Ka didn't want their help, even when she knows that the Separatists' new weapon could easily wipe out the Lerman. Seriously, this bitch is willing to leave the Lerman to extinction just so she can nurse her completely unwarranted grudge against them. When the Separatists fire their weapon on the Lerman village, Ahsoka stares into the face of destruction with positively demonic glee. Just remember, folks, this is the character fans refer to as what the Jedi should be. Season 1, Episode 19, Storm over Ryloth. In the opening moments of the episode, Ahsoka makes it clear that she's more concerned with the kind of impression she'll make as a newly appointed squadron leader than she is with the welfare of the citizens of Ryloth.
Let's make a good impression.
After Ahsoka repeatedly disobeys orders, The writers make sure to throw Anakin under the bus by having Yularen ask him if he trained his Padawan not to follow orders. During their retreat, Ahsoka, instead of falling back to cover her men, forges on ahead and simply tells them to keep up, ultimately leaving them behind to be shot down one by one while she emerges without so much as a scratch. In the wake of Ahsoka's massive screw-up, Anakin reminds her that the first rule of war is to listen and obey your superiors. But as we see throughout the rest of the series, this is yet another lesson that she failed to learn. Anakin's scolding session, however, is cut short as soon as Ahsoka pouts, and he immediately switches to babying her, telling her it's not her fault. Yeah, the trap wasn't her fault, but the heavy casualties caused by her willful disobedience definitely is. During a later conversation with Anakin, Ahsoka shifts the blame for her failure onto him, and insists that they can no longer help the citizens of Ryloth, despite being aware of the sheer importance of their mission.
We are to proceed with our attack on the blockade.
We can't!
We have to break that blockade. The Twi'leks on Ryloth are depending on us. Don't worry, Ahsoka.
That's what you said last time, and now everyone's gone! My whole squadron!
At the end of the episode, when Obi-Wan expresses confusion over why so much of Anakin's fleet is missing, Ahsoka completely shrugs off any and all responsibility, refusing to even acknowledge her faults. Yeah, I can totally see how she's feeling remorse and growing as a character. Oh wait, no I can't, because that's not what's happening. Season 2, Episode 1, Holocron Heist. So, you remember Jocasta Nu? You know, the Jocasta Nu who went up against multiple clones, went up against the Grand Inquisitor, even contended with Darth Vader for a time. Yeah, to make sure Ahsoka ended up the sole hero in the episode, the writers made Jocasta unable to even take on a changeling. Pathetic. Season 2, Episode 6, Weapons Factory. When Anakin protests Luminar's plan, Ahsoka acts insulted, pointedly stating that she's had riskier assignments, when the fact remains that her riskiest assignment so far was her role as squadron leader in Storm over Ryloth, which she completely and utterly screwed up. When Barriss and Ahsoka are trapped underground, Barriss expresses remorse over their situation, and Ahsoka flippantly remarks that they'll soon suffocate to death. Wow, Ahsoka. So comforting. Season 2, Episode 8, Brain Invaders. Ahsoka reveals her massively screwed up perception of the Jedi by saying,
I was just thinking about what you said earlier, about enjoying the peace while it lasts. As a Jedi, I'm not sure I know how to do that.
This is especially ironic since in the next moment she accuses Anakin of warmongering. Does she not hear herself? Season 2, Episode 11, Lightsaber Lost. When Anakin instructs Ahsoka to wait outside the bar while he searches for their intended target, Ahsoka gripes to herself.
Just like always.
Of course, we've seen absolutely nothing to back up this statement aside from this one instance, but Ahsoka's gotta have something to complain about, right? Ahsoka, instead of confiding in Anakin, shows her complete lack of trust in him by choosing to outright lie to him in order to escape the consequences for her perceived shortcomings. And after Jocasta urges her to reveal her loss to Anakin, she claims,
He tells me over and over, your lightsaber is your life. Don't lose it.
Again, we have seen no evidence of this. This dynamic is just shamelessly ripped from Anakin and Obi-Wan in Attack of the Clones. Congratulations, Filoni, you have reached peak laziness. Through her mishandling of the dealings with the smugglers, Ahsoka places herself in debt to the underworld.
I think it's time you forget about him and do me a favor.
I hope you remember this and someday do me a favor.
The writers, of course, are quick to sweep this under the rug, since obviously we can't have little Miss Mary Sue suffer consequences for her actions, right? When voicing Ahsoka's concerns, Sunube says,
You worry that if people die at the hands of your lightsaber, that you will be as guilty for their death as the one that strikes the blow. A valid concern, young one.
Ignoring the horrific victim-blaming mentality that's going on here, it's too bad Ahsoka didn't have this valid concern in Season 7 when she sicked Maul on the clones. Ahsoka acts suspicious of Ione when she has no reason to believe Ione is anything other than a victim.
Are they gone? The men who killed Nak.
Who are you? Ione, did you call for help? Why were you hiding?
I was afraid.
This is some lame attempt by the writers to make Ahsoka look smarter than Sanube. Instead, it, along with many other instances throughout the series, makes Ahsoka appear insensitive and stupid. Immediately following the scene where Sanube tells Ahsoka that he can see she's learned patience, Ahsoka clearly displays her impatience.
Hey! You're driving too slow! We need to go faster!
Ahsoka endangers Cassie's hostages by acting volatile, yelling at Cassie and ordering her around rather than showing patience and relying on negotiation.
Surrender now and turn the lightsaber over to me. Let them go.
She also takes the opportunity to feed her own ego once again by claiming that she's worth a lot to the Jedi, when in reality, as we've seen time and time again throughout the show, Padawans are considered a dime a dozen. Season 2, Episode 17, Bounty Hunters. While being held at blaster point, Ahsoka stupidly decides to ignite her lightsaber and thus further escalate an already bad situation. This idiocy could have easily resulted in her death. Ahsoka once again displays her inability to see the bigger picture, as well as her total disrespect for authority, when she angrily demands to know why Obi-Wan is refusing to help the farmers.
We couldn't help even if we wanted to.
What? These farmers are in trouble. Why can't we help them?
Obi-Wan of course explains that if they stay on Felucia any longer, the Separatists will come looking for them there. If discovered by the Separatists to be harboring Jedi, the farmers would suffer a much worse fate than being robbed by pirates. The writers then save Ahsoka the trouble of responding to this and probably making herself look worse in the process by having the pirates make their entrance at that precise moment. Season 2, Episode 22, Lethal Trackdown. After being reminded by Plo Koon to be patient, Ahsoka comes barging into his confrontation with Aura, putting him at risk by escalating the situation. Plus, her highly aggressive tactics, as showcased through her holding a lightsaber to Aura's throat, once again displays Ahsoka's apparent incapability of approaching a volatile situation in a Jedi-like manner. She then makes the situation 10 times worse by proudly informing Aura and Boba that she's not a murderer, essentially making it clear that her unspoken threat was merely a bluff, and thus losing any advantage she and Plo might have gained through her overly antagonistic display. After telling the bounty hunters that she's not a murderer, Ahsoka then tries her hardest to become one. Season 3, Episode 6, The Academy. After the students tell Ahsoka they've found corruption, she just dismisses them. And Corky says,
"You sound more like my aunt than a Jedi Knight."
Newsflash, Jedi are peacekeepers. So, of course, they would sound similar to a pacifist. But Ahsoka looks disturbed by this comparison. So after telling them not to act until they've examined all the facts and all the people involved, Ahsoka just jumps right in and takes charge, treating the students like pawns. The plan, if you can call it that, was that she'd turn them in and just ask where Satine was being kept, and Prime Minister Almec would just tell her. Well, he didn't, and the kids get thrown in prison. So one of the kids sighs,
"I knew this plan wouldn't work."
And Ahsoka reacts all offended, and then tells them she just needs to modify the plan, but won't tell them how. She just says,
"You'll know when to act when I give the signal."
But doesn't say what the signal is or what action to take when it's given. Seems to me like she doesn't have a plan. Ahsoka mind tricks the guard to take her to Satine and then just tries to get away with her. So obviously the kids weren't involved in the plan. But wait, it was a trap. The guards weren't really mind-tricked, they were just pretending.
Using a Jedi mind trick was a very poor decision. My guards have been trained to resist such archaic magic.
So Ahsoka gets captured and Satine gets tortured. Was that part of the plan, Ahsoka? When Satine still refuses to give Almec what he wants, he brings in all the kids so they can torture just Corky.
I'm afraid your nephew will have to suffer needlessly. Put the shock collar on Cadet Corky.
And then Ahsoka just attacks the guards and the students follow suit, somehow overpowering their captors. So was that the plan? Given that Ahsoka would have no way of knowing that the guards wouldn't fall for her mind trick, or that Satine wouldn't just cave to Almec's demands, or that those same kids who she had to rescue a couple hours earlier when they weren't handcuffed would now suddenly have the knowledge and ability to take out trained armed guards, it couldn't have been. So she didn't have a plan. Lives were in danger, the whole planet was in danger, but she didn't want to look bad, so she lied about having a plan and just hoped for the best. And of course, everything just magically turned out for her. And as we mentioned before, Satine ends up heaping all the credit on Ahsoka, ignoring how much the students contributed. Mary Sue. At the end of the episode, Ahsoka laughs about endangering untrained children, saying that it was a highlight of her mission. And then she claims that it's
nothing you wouldn't have done.
Season 3, Episode 7, Assassin. Ahsoka unreasonably expects Padme to cancel her plans despite having no legitimate proof that the Senator's life is in danger.
I've been having dreams. Bad dreams. Ahsoka, the refugee situation is much too crucial to ignore. But the threat to your life.
When being questioned about her visions, Ahsoka is somehow unable to use simple deduction skills to determine Aura's whereabouts or her level of success. After sensing Aura's presence, Ahsoka nonsensically chooses not to alert the guards standing right next to her. Season 3, Episode 18 to 20, Citadel Arc. Ahsoka outright lies to Anakin and Obi-Wan, using Plo Koon as a tool to justify her outrageous actions.
I received orders to join the team. I discussed it with Master Plo.
Obi-Wan, instead of pulling rank and ordering Ahsoka to stay on the ship, backs her up after she once again throws her master under the bus and happily invites her to join the mission.
I see Anakin's new teaching method is to do as I say, not as I do. Welcome aboard.
Anakin and Obi-Wan are both presented as idiots in this moment because, firstly, Ahsoka's story doesn't even add up.
I received orders to join the team. I thought you knew. I discussed it with Master Plo.
He didn't tell me.
You were already in Carbonite.
And secondly, they know that Ahsoka hasn't been briefed on the mission, meaning that at best she'd be a useless addition to the team and at worst she'd be a liability. But of course we already know how it all turns out, with the writers once again exposing their bias and Ahsoka further exposing herself as a Mary Sue. After effectively appointing herself as Scout, Ahsoka then completely and utterly fails at this simple task, showing herself to be apparently incapable of spotting droids just a few feet away.
The coast is clear.
After Ahsoka self-righteously shakes her head at Anakin, he then rewards her disrespect by giving her the lead.
He has a point. Alright, Snips, I need you to lead the group.
After having to be reminded of the plan by Anakin, after carrying it out, Ahsoka proudly sticks her nose up at her master. Can someone please slap this bitch? When Master Peel is under attack by the Anubis, Ahsoka takes her sweet time in coming to his rescue.
Master Peel!
This unwarranted delay in a time where seconds counted leads to Ahsoka becoming one of the most important members of the team. A little too convenient, if you ask me. Season 4, Episode 3, Prisoners. Reflecting the instance with the Mastiff alone back in Season 1, Ahsoka once again reflexively goes for her lightsabers and has to be dissuaded from violence. This time by Lee Char, who admittedly displays a much more Jedi-like attitude than the actual Jedi present.
No. Stay your blade, my friend.
Season 4, Episode 11 to 13, Zygerian Slaver Arc. The writers blatantly showboat Ahsoka, having her front and center while Anakin and Obi-Wan are largely forgotten. When Anakin reacts angrily to the news that the Tegrutans have been kidnapped by slavers, Ahsoka gives him weird looks. Firstly, this shows how little Ahsoka cares about her people or Anakin, since a much more appropriate response would have been to show concern. Secondly, keep in mind that only 4 episodes from now, Ahsoka is shown giving her full support to Anakin when he's displaying much more sinister behavior, but we'll get to that. After learning of the colonists' disappearance, Ahsoka nonsensically remarks,
"That's impossible. Those are my people."
She seriously believes that just because they're connected to her, that they should somehow be impervious to disaster. Sorry, Ahsoka, but unfortunately your immense plot armor does not extend to other characters. Quite the opposite, actually. When Anakin is working his way into the Queen's good graces, Ahsoka, rather than appreciating her master's impressive acting skills, rolls her eyes.
When I look upon the magnificence of your highness, whose beauty would make the brightest star seem dull.
She then continues to give weird looks throughout Anakin's later interactions with Mirage. Now, if you'll recall, back in the Season 2 finale, the writers had Plo Koon throw Anakin under the bus in an attempt to excuse Ahsoka's lack of subtlety. This arc perfectly shows just how woefully incorrect Plo Koon's statement was. After watching a slave throw herself off a balcony out of sheer desperation, Ahsoka does not react in any way, shape, or form. What the f***? While Rex is fighting the Zygerian guards, Ahsoka simply stands around for several seconds before finally going to apprehend the Queen.
Ahsoka, the Queen!
When one of the slavers explains that Ahsoka was promised to him by the Queen, Ahsoka responds by causing him to nearly fall to his death. This displays her vengeful streak once again, and ultimately only serves to anger the slaver, causing him to retaliate via torture. Brilliant move there, Ahsoka. Ahsoka expresses concerns over getting caught in friendly fire, thus showing distrust toward her allies. When Anakin assures her that they and all the slaves will be leaving the facility intact, Ahsoka remarks,
"We'll need a bigger ship."
This shows again how little she cares for her fellow Tegrutans. Of course, the writers later try to cover this up by having Ahsoka selflessly endanger herself to help her people. While Anakin is fighting multiple Zygerian guards, Ahsoka stands back, making no move whatsoever to offer assistance. Then, after Anakin has nullified the threat, Ahsoka promptly gives more weird looks. Ahsoka defies the laws of physics. Season 4, Episode 14, A Friend in Need. Ahsoka, despite not being a politician, is present at the peace talks on Mandalore. It's obvious that she has no real reason to be there since she contributes nothing and later leaves the meeting entirely. But of course, the writers had to find some way to crowbar her into the plot. When an agitator appears at the peace talks, Ahsoka tries to prevent him from being removed. Padme literally has to hold her back. When fleeing the Separatist droids, Ahsoka repeatedly leaves Lux behind and cuts him off every time he tries to speak. And as a side note, in Heroes on Both Sides, Ahsoka says to Padme,
"It's a shame you can't hold more peaceful talks when you want."
And now they finally get them.
In an effort to end the galactic conflict, the first ever sanctioned meeting between the Republic and the Separatists will be held. Tensions run high, as many hold hope for these important negotiations.
And what does Ahsoka do?
We've got incoming clankers.
When Anakin contacts Ahsoka saying that Padme informed him of the resulting collapse of the peace talks, Ahsoka sidesteps the issue. She then goes on to explain that she'll be bringing Lux to Coruscant, brazenly assuming that that's what he wanted. And Anakin, for some reason, doesn't call Ahsoka out for ignoring protocol, stranding his wife and the other senators in a volatile situation, and senselessly bringing about the collapse of the peace talks for the sake of someone who is not at all important to the bigger picture. Furthermore, Lux apologizes for Ahsoka's massive screw up, and Ahsoka responds,
"It's nothing."
After Lux says he can't go to Coruscant, Ahsoka promptly throws a fit.
What?
She then proceeds to disarm and threaten him with his own weapon. Ahsoka repeatedly belittles Lux throughout the episode, telling him he's not a fighter and he doesn't know what he's doing. She also calls him stupid to his face and frequently casts doubt on his plan. A pretty shit friendship, if you ask me. After Lux's continued insistence that he won't join the Republic, Ahsoka tries to take him hostage, telling him,
"I'm sorry, but I'm taking you to Coruscant."
She then follows this up with,
"Your plan hasn't exactly been well thought out, Lux. Without me, how did you think you were going to escape those droids?"
Ah yes, Ahsoka never passes up the opportunity to toot her own horn. She takes away his means of self-defense and then claims that he needed her to rescue him, since he's obviously defenseless. Thankfully, this display of arrogance promptly blows up in her face when Lux demonstrates his viable plan of escape.
Like this.
Of course, the writers make sure to have a throwaway line at the end of the episode to try to cover up Ahsoka's disgustingly toxic behavior toward Lux.
We make a pretty good team, don't we?
Season 4, Episode 15, Deception. Ahsoka implies that training younglings is much worse than a long, boring meeting.
Another long, boring debate.
Would you rather they call you in to train younglings?
This coming from the chick who, less than a season from now, is put in charge of a group of younglings. When pursuing Kenobi's supposed killer, Ahsoka is more concerned with how the sniper's location was discovered rather than the fact that they'll finally be able to get justice for Kenobi's death. Goes to show just how little she cared about Obi-Wan. When entering the bar where Hardeen is, Ahsoka surveys the crowd with anger and disgust and then stands by while Anakin violently handles Hardeen. And this is after she told Plo Koon that she was worried about Anakin. Pretty twisted way to show concern for your friends, Ahsoka. Not to mention, this is a 180-degree turn from her behavior in the previous scene, as well as her behavior toward Anakin in the Zygerian Slavers arc. Season 4, Episode 16, Friends and Enemies. Ahsoka's behavior in this episode is more or less a repeat of what we saw in the previous one. Ahsoka is more concerned with how information regarding Hardeen's whereabouts was discovered rather than actually bringing him to justice. But again, this frivolous preoccupation immediately disappears upon entering a seedy bar and is replaced by anger and disgust toward everyone present. And just like in the last episode, Ahsoka stands by while Anakin violently attacks someone. This show just loves to go in circles. It isn't long though before Ahsoka's behavior escalates and she begins partaking in the violence. She rams the enemy ship multiple times, endangering Anakin in the process, and this carelessly close proximity is ultimately what causes the two ships to crash. Overall, Ahsoka aiding and abetting Anakin's revenge mission almost resulted in his and Obi-Wan's death. Good job, Ahsoka. Season 5, Episode 2-5, Onderon Arc. Reflecting the opening of A Friend in Need, Ahsoka, despite her Padawan status, is present for a council meeting even though she contributes absolutely nothing. When meeting the rebels on Onderon, Ahsoka acts as though she is in charge, and promises to help the rebels take back their planet, even though the Jedi's intended mission was to teach the rebels merely how to defend themselves. Again, no one calls her out for this, and her false promise conveniently doesn't raise any issues down the line. As if Lux hadn't made himself clear enough the last time we saw him, Ahsoka somehow still expects him to join the Republic. Is she dense or what? Still attempting to cover up Ahsoka's toxic behavior in A Friend in Need, the writers have Lux positively sing her praises, completely misrepresenting the situation.
She saved me from a huge mistake.
When Anakin senses Ahsoka's jealousy over Lux and asks her about it, she once again displays her complete lack of trust in him by refusing to confide in him, lying instead and insisting that there's nothing wrong.
Are you losing focus?
No,
Master.
Would you look at that? Ahsoka repeating mistakes from the previous seasons, and it's only the millionth time. Similar to the Academy episode in Season 3, when Ahsoka's students try putting her teachings into practice, Ahsoka yells at them before taking charge of things herself.
Hey, what are you doing?
What you taught us!
You will answer for your crimes against the Separatist Alliance.
This also happens to detract from a moment intended to help Lux and Saw grow and bond. Despite the fact that the plan on how to aid the rebels was Anakin's idea, Ahsoka is the one to go with the rebels and oversee their operation. After seemingly making up with Steela and overcoming her jealousy over Lux at the end of episode 2, Ahsoka is right back to displaying this petty jealousy in the next episode. And it's so painfully obvious that Anakin outright has to tell her to keep her head in the game. Ahsoka tries to partially credit herself for the rebels' strategic planning, when all she and the other Republic officers actually taught the rebels was how to throw droid poppers. Nice try, Ahsoka. After Anakin reminds Ahsoka that she needs to put purpose before feelings, Ahsoka literally says she can't help it. And for some reason, Anakin doesn't immediately take her off the mission, which again was his idea to begin with. After Saw's poor reaction to Steela's election, Steela goes to talk it out with him, once again displaying her admirable leadership qualities. But Ahsoka stops her and actually tries to dissuade her from tending to the needs of her fellow rebel. In her report to her superiors, Ahsoka completely misrepresents the rebels' problems and then criticizes their plan for endangering so many lives for the sake of one, a largely hypocritical complaint given Ahsoka's later actions in this arc. But we'll get to that. Anakin has to remind Ahsoka for the umpteenth time that purpose comes before feelings. Does she actually learn it? No.
This woman's going to pay.
That's not fair.
I'm not trying to be. With your help, the Jedi can stop Sidious before it's too late. What do you want with Anakin Skywalker?
He has long been groomed for his role as my master's new apprentice.
I know Anakin.
After the rebels' attempt to rescue the king goes awry, the general willingly sacrifices himself to ensure their escape. But then Ahsoka jumps in, playing hero at the cost of everything. By exposing herself as a Jedi, she is exposing the Republic involvement behind the rebel movement, and thus destroying the Jedi Council's experiment on Onderon, and endangering the rebels by prompting the Separatists to immediately respond with significantly more powerful troops. This very nearly causes the total annihilation of the rebels and the near death of the king. Not to mention, this is yet another perfect example of Ahsoka sacrificing 1,000 lives to save one, when she criticized the rebels for doing the same. The general was sacrificing himself for the cause, and Ahsoka ruined it all. And this is after she encouraged the rebels to just stand back and let the king become a martyr. Purpose before feelings, right, Ahsoka? Right? Furthermore, in the aftermath of this scenario, Lux outright says that he knew Ahsoka couldn't resist the opportunity for a fight, and she makes no effort to deny it. In fact, she pretty much confirms that he's right.
Am I becoming that predictable?
And of course, in her report to Anakin and Obi-Wan, she is careful to avoid taking responsibility for exposing the Republic aid behind the rebels, by phrasing the news in just such a way that it makes it sound as though the Separatists found out all on their own.
The Separatists definitely know we're backing the rebels.
She then follows this up by expecting that the Council and Republic will just immediately clean up the mess she's made by entering into a full-scale battle on Onderon, which is exactly what they were trying to avoid. But of course, after their refusal to do so, Ahsoka is held completely blameless by the narrative, while the Jedi Council and the Republic are painted as the bad guys. When things are beyond hope, Obi-Wan tells Ahsoka to evacuate as many of the rebels as she can and bring them to Coruscant. But immediately after this call, Steela asks, "Will the Republic help us?" and Ahsoka responds, "No." She doesn't tell them that there's an option for escape. Instead, after receiving no indication from Anakin that he'd be going through back doors to help them deal with the Separatist army, the dialogue implies that Ahsoka has given the rebels baseless hope that he will do exactly that.
Any word from Master Skywalker?
Not yet.
While everything's going to hell in a handbasket, Ahsoka tells Steela that she will protect them, but she won't fight for them. And then she claims she wishes she could do more. So now suddenly she's letting the Council's orders to not get involved restrict her behavior. How convenient, now that the risk to her life is a lot higher. Thanks a lot, Ahsoka. And naturally the writers make sure to have Steela tell Ahsoka that they wouldn't have made it this far without her, when again, all Ahsoka did was teach the rebels how to throw some droid poppers, occasionally give terrible advice, and screw them all over. And on top of all that, Anakin, through his attempts to help, is yet again rewarding Ahsoka for her abominable behavior, which again, reminder, ruined his plan to help the rebels. After Steela expresses concern over a Separatist patrol ship in their area, Ahsoka shrugs it off as though it's nothing.
I think she's dumb. I think she's dumb. I think she's dumb. I think she. Do you think she's dumb?
After Steela is praised for leading by example, Ahsoka criticizes her for endangering herself. Kind of unavoidable, Ahsoka. But sure, you just keep sitting on the sidelines pretending you wish you could help more, while criticizing people for fighting for a cause. Ahsoka is shot directly in the shoulder with a cannon, but only receives mild injuries as a result. Mary Sue. Instead of Ahsoka apologizing for putting them in that situation and failing to save Steela, Saw is the one who blames himself for his sister's death, as though he was magically supposed to know that the ship he shot down was going to crash into Steela's location. Wow, the writers really are desperate, aren't they? Season 5, episodes 6 to 9, the Younglings Arc. Despite Ahsoka expressing clear disdain at the thought of training younglings back in Obi-Wan's undercover arc, she is sent alongside Yoda to Ilum, where she is tasked with helping train younglings. And she apparently has no issue with this. Furthermore, in the next episode, Yoda miraculously disappears, leaving Ahsoka in sole charge of priceless cargo. Ahsoka then partakes in child abuse by sending the younglings by themselves into the caves and thus endangering them. She also tells them to leave the caves immediately after they find their crystals, elsewise they might end up trapped there. By telling them this, she's essentially instilling a fear into the younglings that may end up dissuading them from taking the time to help each other, even though Yoda told them they need to trust each other. Ironically enough, the opening quip for episode 2 of this arc is that children are often underestimated. And what does Ahsoka do? She underestimates the children. Now, reminder, it wasn't that long ago that Ahsoka was still young enough to be considered a child herself, and we all know how much she hated it when anyone dared to underestimate her. So this is yet another example of Ahsoka's hypocrisy. Furthermore, she gets annoyed with the younglings when they are frightened and asking a lot of questions.
What about the pirates already on board the ship? Once the docking tube is ruptured, when the ships pull apart, a vacuum will be created, which will suck the pirates off our ship and into space.
Will we be sucked into space?
No. The cockpit and the hold will be sealed and still have air. Do not, and I mean do not engage the pirates. Your only job is to stay hidden. Do you understand?
Instead of prioritizing the safety of the children and trying to negotiate with Hondo as would be befitting for a Jedi, Ahsoka immediately goes the route of violence and quickly escalates the situation. And what makes it all the more laughable is that Ahsoka then tells Hondo that she doesn't want to hurt him.
You serious?
Of course, in the next episode, the narrator props her up by painting the whole situation as Ahsoka sacrificing herself for the younglings, when in reality, the fact that she got sucked out of the airlock and captured by pirates was an unintended result of her needlessly picking fights and not paying attention to her surroundings. Furthermore, the narrator insists that the younglings are all alone. Except they're not. They have Huang, as well as R2. But sure, discredit the other characters so you can make Ahsoka seem more important. In his conversation with the younglings, Obi-Wan says,
Hondo would be even more of a fool than I think he is to hurt her.
Why? It's clear enough that Padawans are considered a dime a dozen. The Jedi couldn't even be bothered to have any decent security for the younglings in this arc. And Hondo certainly wasn't holding back in his previous fight with Ahsoka. This claim is completely nonsensical and only serves to hype up Mary Sue Ahsoka. After concluding his conversation with the stranded younglings, Obi-Wan notes that their coordinates put them dangerously close to Florum. So Ahsoka, who was supposedly solely in charge of the younglings and the shipment of crystals, decided to just casually fly right next to pirate territory? Wow, so responsible. For some reason, Hondo decides to keep Ahsoka alive and just around. He treats her more like a trophy than a business commodity, despite making it clear that he does intend to treat her as a business commodity. Yet conveniently, it seems like he's in no hurry to actually pawn her off, which of course enables the younglings to rescue her later. Plot armor! And of course Ahsoka jumps at the chance to do a little fear-mongering.
The Separatists can't be trusted. They'll betray you and kill us both.
It would have made more sense if she'd focused on Hondo's poor relations with the Separatists, something Hondo himself then proceeds to do by bringing up the fact that he kidnapped Dooku in the past. But no, it's more that narrow-minded black and white thinking from Ahsoka. Despite the fact that she should know that the pirates will be after them, Ahsoka acts completely relaxed in the final moments of the episode. She should be looking out for her charges by keeping watch. After all, it's the least she could do after they risked their lives to rescue her. But she doesn't do that. Instead of piloting the tank herself, Ahsoka instructs Katuni to use a mask in order to create a precarious setup that unsurprisingly ends up backfiring, forcing one of the younglings to return to the controls. Again, Ahsoka should have been the one piloting in this instance, but instead she leaves it to the kids she's supposed to be looking out for. Not doing great, Ahsoka. The writers give Ahsoka apparent omniscience when she correctly describes the situation with Kenobi and the planet system, something which she should have no knowledge of.
The fact that Grievous is here with his entire fleet means that Master Kenobi must have been overrun. This entire system is now in Separatist-controlled space.
When Grievous arrives on the scene, Ahsoka nonsensically decides to try to use herself as a shield for the children. Rather hilarious that she's so quick to draw her lightsabers and get aggressive when the situation doesn't call for it, but when it does call for it, she chooses instead to use the peaceful method, or in this case, the stupid one. Ahsoka not only survives her duel with Grievous, but puts up a damn good fight against one of the most notorious Jedi killers of her time, Mary Sue! Season 5, episodes 17 to 20, The Wrong Jedi Arc. When Anakin and Ahsoka are asked to investigate the temple bombing, Mace tells them that they are needed because
we can't trust anyone who was here. Even a Jedi. You and Ahsoka will provide an impartial point of view, free of assumptions.
However, we see from the start that Ahsoka refuses to sincerely consider the possibility that a Jedi was responsible.
I can't believe a Jedi would attack a place this sacred.
Do you believe what they said, Master? That a Jedi could do this?
Not every Jedi agrees with this war, Ahsoka. There are many political idealists among us.
But a traitor.
She didn't want it to be a Jedi, so she didn't look any further when the trail led to Letta. Scapegoat found, case closed.
People blamed Jedi because of you.
I don't know how I would have felt if a Jedi was really behind this.
Even when Letta tells her it was a Jedi in the following episode, Ahsoka still dismisses it.
Why would a Jedi do this?
After Letta is killed and Ahsoka is blamed, she vaguely refers to someone setting her up. And in episode 19, as soon as she sees Ventress, she cries,
"You were behind all of this, and you framed me!"
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yes, you do!
She drops the accusation suddenly, but when someone with Ventress's lightsabers shows up, Ahsoka immediately jumps back to the conclusion that Ventress is to blame. Seriously, if she's such good friends with Barriss, how does she not recognize her? Or at the very least, immediately recognize that it's not Ventress because she looks and acts completely different. In episode 20, Ahsoka suggests to the Council and insists to Anakin that Ventress is behind it all.
I am not deceiving you. I would assume Ventress is. I am almost certain that the person behind this is Ventress.
She doesn't even mention Barriss, so she still believes so strongly that a Jedi would not be responsible that she doesn't consider Barriss's involvement to be relevant information and instead wrongfully accuses Ventress. I guess so long as the blame shifts off of her, regardless if she's framing somebody else, it's all good, right? At the beginning of episode 18, when Yoda asks for a moment of silence to remember the Jedi killed in the bombing, Ahsoka waits all of a few seconds before pestering Barriss, who very clearly seemed to be grieving about whether or not she knew the victims. Why don't you, let her have her moment of silence to remember them by rather than asking stupid questions? Once again, Ahsoka proves herself to be incapable of sensitivity. So remember this line?
I have to believe that one way or another, this woman's going to pay for what she did.
So it's not enough for Ahsoka that Letta is rotting in jail, scheduled to be executed, a fact which Ahsoka is quick to remind her of in their later conversation.
You don't have much time, Letta, so I suggest you get whatever you have to say off your chest.
Yet after acting so abominably toward Letta, we're supposed to believe that Ahsoka is saddened by her death. Right. For some reason, Letta, who has made it clear that she is very anti-Jedi, insists she will only speak to Ahsoka, saying that she'd been told to contact Ahsoka if ever she needed help. Told by who? Barriss? Barriss is the one she's afraid of. So why would she take her advice? This is just an absurdly lazy excuse to shove Ahsoka into the spotlight. When Tarkin aptly identifies what could very well prove to be motive for Ahsoka to kill Letta, Ahsoka nonsensically claims,
"That means nothing."
I beg to differ.
Yeah, what he said.
And if there was someone else, why did you not sense them?
Valid question. The entire sequence of Ahsoka running away is just shameless showboating. Not to mention, it should have ended with Ahsoka being dragged back to prison because, 1, she was caught in an explosion which should have incapacitated if not seriously injured her. 2, when the clones had her surrounded, they could have easily stunned her. And 3, when Ahsoka jumped onto the pipe, Anakin simply could have grabbed her with the Force and dragged her sorry ass right back. But of course, the writers dumb down Ahsoka's pursuers and heap plot armor on her so she can get away no problem. Again, the narrator props her up, claiming that she had no choice but to run. Yes, sorry, but I'm gonna call bull on that one. Furthermore, the narrator says that Ahsoka knows that there is little hope of being cleared of the crimes. The crime of killing Letta and the clones maybe, and only because that prison has the worst security system ever, but Ahsoka has an airtight alibi for the temple bombing. She and Anakin were specifically asked to investigate because they weren't there at the time. Throughout her interactions with Barriss, Ahsoka is given an abundance of clues that Barriss may be involved in the plot to frame her, but somehow she completely overlooks them. And again, this is after Letta told her that a Jedi is responsible for the temple bombing, so she should be wary of any Jedi. But due to her own bias, she chooses to ignore these warnings, even though she tells Ventress later that it was a traitorous Jedi who framed her. She knows, but she's not acting on this knowledge. She's acting completely contrary to it. Ahsoka apparently doesn't know how elevators work.
I guess I'm not exactly on my game these days.
Again, when the clones have Ahsoka surrounded, they choose not to immediately stun her. In fact, they apparently completely forget how to use their blasters at all. More of the writers dumbing down Ahsoka's pursuers so that she can get away no problem. Furthermore, despite claiming that she doesn't want to fight, Ahsoka instantly gets aggressive when the clones tell her that they're bringing her in, speaking in a very dark tone reminiscent of the way she spoke to the Zygerian slaver back in season 4, and gesturing as if to say, "Bring it! I can take you!"
We're taking you in now, Commander.
That's not gonna happen. Trust me.
Yeah, we can totally tell you don't want to fight Ahsoka.
I knew you couldn't resist a good fight.
Am I becoming that predictable?
For some reason, when attacked by someone she believes to be Ventress, Ahsoka demands...
Why bring me here?
Because you asked her to, remember?
Ahsoka faces punishment for crimes she did not commit.
What about the crime of her existence? Season 7. When Rafa confronts Ahsoka at the beginning of Deal No Deal, instead of trying to be understanding of Rafa's reasonable distrust, Ahsoka gets offended.
Excuse me?
Interesting. I remember her using those exact words back in Season 1 in an instance where she was being equally as unreasonable and egotistical as she is now.
Excuse me?
Oh where is the character growth? In the following episode, after the girls have escaped from the Pike prison, Ahsoka once again displays her ego.
You go disable the gates while Trace and I distract the guards.
That must mean you think disabling the gate is the difficult part.
When Bo-Katan approaches Ahsoka asking for help, Ahsoka expresses reluctance to get involved because she's worried it might lead back to the Jedi.
But if I go down this path, I'm afraid where it might lead. You mean back to the Jedi? Yes.
But in the next episode, Old Friends Not Forgotten, after her argument with Kenobi, Bo-Katan says to Ahsoka,
I told you this was a waste of time.
Implying that it was Ahsoka's idea to come there and Bo-Katan didn't want to. Furthermore, this means that Bo-Katan seriously thought that a 17-year-old ex-Padawan was all she needed to launch an invasion of Mandalore. Ladies and gentlemen, the Mary Sudum is certainly strong with this one. During Almec's interrogation, when Almec withholds information, Ahsoka's response is to tell Bo to help him remember when she knows Bo's methods will be violent.
Terror is not a weapon the Jedi use.
But the only way he'll talk is if he's scared enough.
Again, where is the character growth? So remember back in Season 1 when Ahsoka largely disregarded Ayla's advice to not lose 1,000 lives for the sake of one? After agreeing to help Maul and rightly assessing that he could be pivotal to stopping Sidious before it's too late, she quickly turns on him when she learns he planned to kill Anakin, thus risking countless lives for the sake of one. Bravo, Ahsoka. You have once again proved yourself completely incapable of adhering to Jedi principles. Rex conveniently doesn't call out Ahsoka for freeing Maul, even though he called out Krell for very similar behavior back in Season 4.
I followed your orders, even in the face of a plan that was, in my opinion, severely flawed. A plan that cost us men, not clones. Men!
So unfortunately, I don't really have any closing words for this video, since our general notes were covered at the end of Part 3, which was supposed to be the end of the series, but we were dumb and missed like a bajillion points. And again, we still couldn't fit everything in here, so if you want to see us be a little more thorough, check out our Star Wars The Clone Wars reaction series. We got off to a bit of a bumpy start, but really found our stride around Season 2. And if you want to see how we would rewrite Ahsoka, check out our analysis series. And if you're somehow not convinced that Ahsoka did in fact undergo zero character growth throughout the show, check out our No Growth series. I'll link part 1 in the description below. Or if you're not convinced that Ahsoka's a Mary Sue, well, we have a series on that too. That's the nice thing about being perfectionists. You always know that no matter what, you're always gonna have all your bases covered. It's both a blessing and a curse. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed, be sure to give us a like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. And if you're interested in supporting the channel, check out our Patreon, link in the description. Also, massive thanks to those of you who are already patrons. Don't forget to stay loud and proud, folks. I'm your Alibi, and I will see you next time.